France, May 21, 1940, near Arras. Private Daniel Mercer of the 7th Battalion, Durham Light Infantry, lies flat in a beet field churned into mud by artillery. The earth smells of fertilizer and cordite. His 1937 patterned battledress is soaked through at the elbows. A thin line of sweat crawls under the rim of his MK helmet despite the cold. Ahead of him, beyond a hedgerow torn open by shellfire, German armor moves. He hears them before he sees them. Maybach engines growling low and steady, not the frantic roar of trucks. Something heavier, deliberate. The sound vibrates through the ground and into his ribs. Panzers, whispers Corporal Hargreaves beside him. Daniel shifts his grip on his Lee Enfield No. 1 Mk3, 5 rounds loaded. Another 15 bandoliers across his chest. It feels absurdly small against steel. Through a break in the hedge, he catches his first glimpse. A Panzer III, grey paint dulled by dust. Black Balkan crews stark against the turret. Behind it, 2 Panzer IIs. Their tracks slice through wheat like blades. The British line has already buckled once this week. Belgium is gone. The French are retreating. London had promised coordination. Instead, Daniel sees German armor moving faster than maps can be redrawn. A sharp crack splits the air, not German. From somewhere behind Daniel's position, a 2-pounder anti-tank gun fires. The recoil thumps through the soil. The shell streaks across the field and strikes the lead panzer. A flash, sparks. The panzer shudders but keeps moving. Daniel's stomach tightens. The shell has hit the front glacis. Too thick, too angled. The German tank pivots its turret with mechanical calm. The 37mm gun fires. The hedgerow explodes. Dirt and splinters rain down. A man screams somewhere to Daniel's left. Front's useless. Hargreaves mutters. You have to let them pass. Let them pass. Daniel turns that over in his mind. Let the steel monsters roll through their line. Trust that someone behind them will stop them. Another British round slams into the 2nd Panzer. Same result. Sparks. No penetration. The German tanks advance without hurry. Confident. There. Commanders half exposed from cupolas scanning. Daniel notices something strange. As the lead panzer climbs over a shallow ditch, its hull lifts slightly. For a brief second, the underside shows dark, thinner, vulnerable. The tank lurches again over uneven ground. The rear engine deck vibrates under strain. Hargreaves nudges him. See that? Daniel nods, pulse rising. The 2-pounder fires again. This time, the gun crew waits. They do not aim at the front. They wait for the tank to angle. The panzer crests a small embankment. Its side armor exposes itself flatter, less angled. The British gun fires. This time, the shell punches clean through. The panzer stops. Smoke spills from the turret seam. Inside the German formation, confusion ripples. Daniel feels it before he understands it. A flaw. Not in courage. Not in steel thickness. The machine gun fire slices low across the beet field. Daniel presses himself into the mud as rounds snap over his helmet. The Panzer III's coaxial MG-34 chatters with steady, mechanical discipline. Each burst is controlled, economical, professional. To his right, the 2-pounder crew works in silence. Sergeant Wilkes stands half exposed behind the gun shield, binoculars hanging from his neck. The weapon itself an ordnance QF, 2-pounder sits low on its split-trail carriage, almost delicate against the advancing armor. Its barrel smokes faintly from the last shot. Hold, Wilkes mutters. Another Panzer II veers toward the gun position, trying to angle its thicker frontal armor. The German commander, goggles pushed up on his cap, shouts something Daniel cannot hear. They are adapting. Daniel swallows. This is no lucky hit. The Germans will not offer that side profile twice. The Panzer II accelerates over an even ground. Its suspension bounces. For a fraction of a second, the hull tilts. Now, Wilkes snaps. The 2-pounder fires. The armor-piercing shot strikes just behind the turret ring. A clean impact. No sparks this time, just a sharp, violent rupture. The Panzer lurches forward another yard, then stops. Black smoke pours upward. The turret hatch flies open. A German crewman hauls himself out, uniform smoldering. He stumbles down the side of the tank, collapses into the dirt. Daniel watches him for half a heartbeat too long. He is just a man. Then the 3rd Panzer fires. The British gun shield shatters under a direct hit. One of the loaders goes down instantly. Wilkes is thrown backward, face cut open by flying steel. Gun still live. Someone shouts. Daniel's heart pounds. If that gun falls silent, the line breaks. He crawls toward the position, rifle slung across his back. Dirt sprays as machine gun fire follows him. A bullet tears through the sleeve of his battledress. He reaches the gun pit just as the surviving loader, barely older than Daniel, tries to drag the fallen man clear. You can load. The loader gasps. Daniel nods. He has trained on this, once, on Salisbury Plain, firing at wooden silhouettes. This is different. The Panzer III is circling now, presenting only its angled front. Its commander has learned it. He keeps the hull turned. No exposed flank. Wait for it to crest. Wilkes croaks from the ground, blood running into his eye. It has to see us. The tank advances toward a shallow rise in the field. To fire accurately, it must climb. To climb, it must expose its belly and flatten its side. The flaw is not weak steel. It is movement. The Panzer begins to climb. Daniel rams a fresh round into the breach. The hull lifts. For one terrible second, the 37mm gun on the German turret lowers directly toward them. Fire, Wilkes whispers. Daniel pulls the firing lever. The shot slams into the underside just as the German gun flashes. The explosion throws Daniel backward into the mud. When his ears stop ringing, he sees the Panzer. The silence lasts only seconds. Then the horizon trembles. Daniel feels it through the earth. Before he sees them, more Panzers rolling forward in disciplined formation. Gray shapes emerging through drifting smoke. Not three this time. A line. Panzer IS. At least one Panzer IV. Its short 75mm gun heavy and blunt like a hammer. They are not charging. They are studying the field. Daniel wipes mud from his eyes and peers over the cracked gun shield. The two burning tanks send black columns into the sky. The Germans have seen what happened. They know the British gun is still alive. Shift position, Wilkes orders, voice raw but steady. They'll bracket us. Daniel and the loader strain to swing the 2-pounder by hand. The wheels grind against mud. The weapon feels heavier now, exposed. A shell whistles in. It lands 20 yards short. Earth erupts. The next round lands long. They are walking the fire in. Daniel's chest tightens. The flaw only works if the tank must move over uneven ground. If the Germans stay back and shell them from distance, the geometry means nothing. The Panzer IV halts beyond effective 2-pounder range. Its turret rotates slowly, deliberately. It fires again. The round slams into the hedgerow behind them. Splinters slash the air. They're learned. The loader whispers. Daniel sees it clearly now. The Germans are advancing hull down when possible, keeping their frontal armor angled, avoiding rises that expose their undersides. They are adapting in real time. Another British position opens fire from the left flank. A Matilda, the 1st Infantry tank, slow, boxy. Thick armored lumbers forward behind a ridge. Its 2-pounder cracks sharply. The Germans shift attention. One Panzer III attempts to reposition, cutting across uneven ground to gain a better angle on the Matilda. Daniel sees the opportunity instantly. Left tank, moving, he says. Wilkes nods once. The Panzer accelerates, trying to reach cover. Its suspension bounces violently. The hull rocks side to side. The side armor flattens for a split second. Load. Daniel slams the round home. The German commander spots them. He shouts, dropping into the turret. The Panzer begins to pivot front on. Too late. Fire. The 2-pounder kicks. The shell tears through the Panzer's side plate just behind the driver's visor. A bright flash bursts from within. The tank shudders to a halt, engine screaming before dying. Inside, something detonates. The turret hatch blasts open. Daniel stares at the crippled machine. 3 destroyed now. But the remaining German armor does not panic. Instead, they spread out. Wide intervals. Coordinated arcs of fire. The Panzer IV's 75mm thunders again. This time the shell lands directly beside the 2-pounder. The loader disappears in dust and flame. Daniel is thrown flat, ears ringing. He tastes blood. When the smoke clears, the gun barrel lies twisted at an unnatural angle. Wilkes does not move. Daniel pushes himself up slowly, hands shaking. The flaw still exists. Daniel stands alone beside the wrecked 2-pounder, ears ringing, rifle hanging useless at his side. The German commander remains half exposed in the cupola, black Panzer wrap collar sharp against the gray sky. His binoculars are raised. He sees Daniel. The turret begins to rotate. Daniel drops behind the broken gun carriage as the MG-34 erupts. Bullets shred canvas and wood. Splinters sting his face. He crawls toward the hedgerow, heart pounding in his throat. The British line is fractured, now small, pockets of infantry scattered. Among burning fields, the Matilda to the left still fires, its thick armor shrugging off smaller shells, but it is slow, too slow. The Panzer keeps advancing, angled perfectly. No exposed flank, no rise beneath its tracks. They have learned it. Daniel reaches the hedge and rolls into the shallow drainage ditch behind it. Beside him lies a dead Durham soldier clutching a boy's anti-tank rifle. The long, awkward weapon rests against the man's shoulder as if he might still fire it. Daniel hesitates only a second. He pries the rifle free. The boy feels heavier than he remembers from training. Nearly 35 pounds of steel and recoil. 5-round magazine. Effective only if you hit something thin. Then, the Flaw was never about weakness in German courage. It was never about British bravery. It is about angles. Daniel peers through the hedge. The Panzer III has stopped 15 yards away, scanning for survivors. Its turret searches left, right. The commander barks an order in German. The tank begins pivoting slowly to bring its gun to bear on the Matilda again. As it turns, Daniel notices something small but vital. The turret ring. Where the turret meets the hull, there is a narrow seam less armored, mechanical necessity. When the turret rotates, that seam shifts. The tank continues turning. Daniel braces the boy's rifle along the ditch edge. His shoulder presses into mud. He exhales slowly. The Panzer's turret aligns away from him, presenting the thinnest profile at the turret base. He squeezes the trigger. The recoil slams into him like a hammer. The anti-tank round cracks across the short distance and strikes the turret ring. For a second, nothing. Then the turret jams mid-rotation. The German commander curses, trying to force movement. The tank's main gun stalls at an awkward angle, no longer tracking properly. Daniel works the bolt, hands shaking. Inside the tank, someone pounds against metal. The Matilda sees its chance. The British tank fires. The 2-pounder round punches clean through the Panzer's immobilized side. The German tank convulses. Smoke bursts from every seam. Daniel lowers the boy's rifle slowly. The Flaw is widening, not just in hull geometry, in mechanics, in the tiny compromises of steel and motion. But as the Panzer burns, Daniel hears something new beyond the smoke. Engines, higher pitched, faster. And they are not stopping to study the field. They are charging straight for it. The new engines are lighter, faster. Daniel lifts his head just enough to see beyond the burning Panzer. A column of German half-tracks bursts through the haze. ST, KFC, 251s, low and angular, infantry packed inside. Behind them, Panzer I is weaving at speed. Their 20mm autocannons already firing. This is not cautious armor probing a weakness. This is exploitation. Infantry. Someone shouts from the British line. The Germans have understood the danger. The British guns are deadly when tanks move alone. So now the tanks will not move alone. Daniel abandons the boy's rifle and crawls back through the hedge, clutching his Leonfield. The Matilda fires again, but it cannot track both armor and advancing infantry. Its commander must choose. A Panzer II swings wide, spraying the hedgerow with 20mm bursts. Leaves explode into dust. British soldiers flatten themselves in shallow scrapes. Return fire snapping sharp and disciplined. Daniel chambers around and fires at the first half-track as it skids to a halt. A German grenadier jumps down, Car 98K in hand, field gray tunic dark with sweat. The man is young, focused. Daniel fires again. The German falls. There is no triumph in it, only urgency. The half-tracks disgorge more infantry. G-34 teams deploy instantly, bipods biting into earth. Their fire is precise, overlapping, rehearsed. The flaw in the Panzer's armor means nothing if British infantry are pinned down before the tanks must maneuver. Daniel ducks as a burst chews through the hedge inches above his head. A British Bren gun answers from his right. The familiar rattling cadence steadies him. Across the field, one of the Panzer I's attempts to flank the Matilda, racing over broken ground to get behind it. Daniel sees the opportunity again. Speed forces exposure. The Panzer II bounces violently as it crosses a shallow irrigation trench. Its thin belly plate flashes into view. Shoot the ditch. Daniel yells. The Bren gunner understands instantly. He lowers his aim. Tracer streaks toward the trench line just as the Panzer crests it. The Matilda's commander reacts at the same moment. The British tank fires. The 2-pounder shell strikes low beneath the angled front plate, catching the thinner underside as the Panzer tips forward. The explosion lifts the light tank off its tracks. For a heartbeat, even the German infantry hesitate. Daniel uses that hesitation. He rises to one knee, fires controlled shots at an MG team trying to set up behind a half-track. One drops, the other crawls back. The Germans begin pulling their infantry closer to the armor, hugging its shadow. They are adjusting again. Smoke thickens across the field. The sun dims behind a gray veil. And through that smoke, Daniel glimpses something larger emerging. Taller, slower. A Panzer for advancing deliberately, its short 75mm gun already searching. This one will not need to maneuver over ditches. It will simply erase the hedgerow from distance, and Daniel has nothing left that can reach it. The Panzer IV does not rush. It advances like something inevitable. Its suspension rolls slowly over the torn, beat field, hull steady, turret deliberate. The short-barreled 75mm KWK-37 shifts left and right, searching for muzzle flashes. It does not need to close distance. It only needs line of sight. Daniel feels the shift in the battle instantly. The lighter panzers hunted. This one executes. Spread out. A British lieutenant shouts somewhere behind him. Too late. The Panzer IV fires. The shell lands squarely in the hedgerow. Earth and splintered timber erupt in a violent column. Daniel is thrown backward into the drainage ditch, breath punched from his lungs. When he lifts his head, half the hedge is gone. The Matilda answers, its 2-pounder cracking sharp and defiant. The shot strikes the Panzer IV's front plate and ricochets away in a burst of sparks. Too thick, too angled. The German tank halts at safe distance, methodical, patient. Its machine gun begins sweeping the exposed field. Daniel crawls through churned soil toward the Matilda's position. Smoke drifts low, masking movement. Around him, British infantry fall back in small groups, trying to reform. The Matilda commander stands half out of his turret, revolver in hand, shouting corrections to his gunner. His tank is heavily armored, nearly immune to the smaller German guns, but it is slow, underpowered, and blind beyond a narrow arc. Flank it, the commander yells, force it to turn. Daniel understands immediately. The Flaw still exists. The Panzer IV's armor is strongest at the front. Its side plates are thinner, its engine deck vulnerable. But to expose those weaknesses, the tank must pivot, and the Germans will not pivot unless threatened. Daniel reaches a shallow fold in the ground to the Panzer's right flank. From here, he cannot penetrate its armor with a rifle, but he can provoke it. He fires deliberately at the commander's cupola. The bullet pings harmlessly off steel, but the German reacts. The turret shifts slightly toward Daniel's position. The Matilda fires again, striking the Panzer's mantlet. No penetration. Daniel fires again, and again. He is not trying to destroy it. He is trying to irritate it. The Panzer IV begins rotating its hull to bring full frontal armor toward Daniel's position. As it pivots, its right side plate flattens toward the Matilda. Now, Daniel shouts, though he knows they cannot hear him clearly through the chaos. The Matilda fires. This time the 2-pounder shell slams into the Panzer IV's exposed side. The impact punches through near the ammunition racks. The German tank convulses. Flame bursts from the turret hatches. A shockwave rolls across the field. The commander tumbles from the cupola, motionless. For a moment, everything stills. Then a sharp crack splits the air behind Daniel. He turns slowly. German infantry have circled wide through the smoke. A squad of grenadiers stands barely 30 yards away, rifles raised, and Daniel's rifle is empty. Daniel stares at the German grenadiers through drifting smoke. 30 yards. Too close. He works the bolt by instinct, hears the hollow click. Empty. The German squad leader shouts a command. Rifles snap to shoulders. One man levels an MP-38, its folding stock tight against his coat. Daniel drops flat as shots crack overhead. Dirt spits against his face. He rolls toward a shallow crater left by the Panzer IV's explosion and drags himself inside. A grenade lands near the rim. He sees the stick handle, black head half buried in loose soil. Daniel does not think. He grabs it and hurls it back over the edge. The blast detonates midair, showering the Germans with earth. Shouts of surprise. One scream. Daniel jams fresh rounds into his Lee Enfield with shaking fingers. 5 cartridges slide home. He rises just enough to fire. One grenadier falls. Another dives behind a half-burned beet cart. The MP-38 rattles again. A bullet tears through Daniel's sleeve, grazing skin. He grits his teeth and fires twice more. The submachine gun falls silent, but more Germans are moving through the haze, coordinated, calm. They are no longer charging blindly behind tanks. They are clearing the field methodically. Daniel hears the distant rumble of engines pulling back. The surviving panzers are withdrawing, not retreating, repositioning. He risks a glance across the field. The Matilda sits crippled, track blown off. Its crew climbing out with hands raised. British infantry are scattered, many cut off from one another. The battle has shifted from armored duel to close infantry fight. A whistle blows sharply in German cadence. Waffen nieder. A voice calls, lay down weapons. Daniel hesitates. He could fire again. He could crawl deeper into smoke, but ammunition is low. British lines are broken. No reinforcements appear over the ridge. He sees 2 of his own men already standing, hands raised. One is barely 18. Another burst of automatic fire cracks above his crater, close enough to feel the heat of it. Daniel lowers his rifle slowly. He climbs from the crater and places the Lee Enfield on the ground. The German squad approaches cautiously, rifles trained. Their faces are young, tired, not triumphant, just efficient. A Feldwebel steps forward, pistol drawn. He studies Daniel's uniform. The Durham Light Infantry patch, the mud, the torn sleeve. You fought the tanks, the German says in accented English. Daniel says nothing. The Feldwebel nods once, almost to himself. Behind them smoke coils upward from 5 destroyed panzers. The flaw in the armor is real. The British turned it into a killing ground. But now the field belongs to the Germans. Daniel and the remaining survivors are herded together, hands raised, boots sinking into churned French soil. As they are marched away, Daniel looks back once more at the burning wrecks. He does not feel defeated. He feels something worse. He wonders if the Germans have learned enough today to make sure the flaw never works again. They march east under a sky the color of dirty tin. Daniel's wrists are not bound, but the rifles at his back make the point clear. Around him, a column of British prisoners moves in uneven silence. Durhams, tankers from the Royal Tank Regiment. A few French infantrymen mixed in. Boots scrape through dust and ash. Behind them, the smoke from Arras still stains the horizon. A German Panzer III idles along the roadside as they pass. Its gray paint is streaked with soot. Daniel forces himself to look at it carefully. Steel side skirts hastily bolted over the tracks. Additional armor plates welded at angles along the hull. Improvised reinforcement around the turret ring. Field modifications. He feels the weight of it settle in his chest. They learn it. A German tanker leans from the turret end, studies the prisoners with detached curiosity. He is young, grease on his cheek, black panzer wrap immaculate despite the smoke. Daniel meets his eyes for a brief second. No hatred there, just calculation. The column halts near a crossroads where a destroyed British lorry still smolders. A group of German officers stands beside a map spread across the hood of a Kübelwagen. Voices are low, urgent. One officer gestures toward the burning tanks in the distance. Another shakes his head sharply. Daniel strains to hear. Seitenpanzerung, Verstärken, strength inside armor, Unterboden, underside. A third officer glances at the captured British 2-pounder shells piled beside the road. He picks one up, weighing it in his hand like a question. Daniel feels a strange chill. The flaw that cost them 5 tanks has already become a lesson. The march resumes. By dusk, they reach a temporary holding area near a railway yard outside. Douai. Barbed wire coils glint in fading light. Guards with Car 9-8 pace along the perimeter. The prisoners are herded inside. No tents, just open ground and the smell of all from nearby tracks. Daniel sinks down against a wooden crate. His shoulder aches from the boy's rifle recoil. His sleeve is stiff with dried blood. Across the wire, German tank crews gather around a disabled Panzer III brought in on a recovery vehicle. Mechanics in gray overalls swarm the hull, measuring, examining the underside where the 2-pounder round punched through. One mechanic taps the belly plate with a hammer, frowning. Another sketches notes in a small pad. Daniel watches every movement. They are not mourning their dead. They are studying their mistakes. A British sergeant beside Daniel mutters, "We blooded them proper." Daniel nods faintly, but he cannot stop watching the mechanics. Because if the Germans solve the flaw, if they thicken the plates, adjust their tactics, shield the vulnerable seams, then what happened at Arras becomes a single, brief advantage. And advantages in war vanish quickly. A searchlight flicks on as night settles. Somewhere beyond the yard, engines rev again. Not retreating, advancing. Night settles over the railway yard like a lid closing. A single searchlight sweeps across the barbed wire, bleaching faces white, then plunging them back into shadow. The prisoners sit in tight clusters for warmth. No blankets, no food yet, just exhaustion. Daniel stays awake. Across the yard, beneath a lantern hung from the recovery vehicle, German mechanics continue working on the crippled Panzer III. The belly plate is exposed now, blackened where the 2-pounder round tore through. An officer in a black Panzer wrap crouches beside it, listening as a mechanic explains something, gesturing to the angle of the hull when cresting an even ground. Daniel cannot hear the words, but he understands the language. Movement equals exposure. Exposure equals death. The officer stands, says something sharp. A Feldwebel nods and walks toward the holding pen. Daniel's stomach tightens. The Feldwebel stops at the wire and scans the prisoners carefully. His gaze pauses on Daniel's torn sleeve, on the mud-caked Durham insignia. "You," he says in clipped English, pointing. Daniel rises slowly. 2 guards unlock the gate. He is escorted across the yard toward the disabled tank. The other prisoners watch without speaking. The Panzer crew stands nearby, 3 men, one with a bandaged hand, one pale, eyes fixed on the ground. The commander from earlier is not among them. Dead, Daniel thinks. The Feldwebel gestures toward the damaged underside. "You fired?" he asks. Daniel hesitates. Silence stretches. The German officer steps forward, older, calm. His iron cross catches the lantern light. You understand armor, the officer says. Not a question. Daniel swallows. I understand angles. The officer studies him for a long moment. Then he nods slightly, as if confirming a theory. You waited for movement, the officer says quietly, for the hull to rise. Daniel says nothing. The mechanic taps the thin plate with his wrench again. The officer turns back to Daniel. British guns are small, he says, but clever. A pause. War is mathematics, the officer continues. Steel and timing. Daniel meets his eyes. And men inside the steel. For the first time, something flickers across the German's face. Not anger, recognition. The officer gives a short order. A guard steps behind. Daniel and strikes him hard between the shoulders with a rifle butt, forcing him to his knees. Enough. The Feldwebel snaps. The officer steadies Daniel one last time. You will go east, he says. Many kilometers. Perhaps you will think less about angles there. Daniel is hauled back to his feet and marched toward the wire again. As he passes the crippled Panzer, he sees the mechanic already marking measurements along the hull's underside. The lesson is being written in steel. And tomorrow, somewhere else in France, British gunners will face tanks that do not expose their bellies so easily. Daniel sinks back down inside the pen. He stares at the lantern-lit machine across the yard. The Flaw is closing. Dawn comes cold and colorless. The prisoners are formed into columns before the sun clears the rail yard cranes. A German NCO reads numbers from a clipboard. Names no longer matter. Units barely matter. Only totals. Daniel stands stiff among the Durhams. His shoulder aches from the rifle blow. Across the yard, the damaged Panzer III is already gone. In its place lies a scatter of metal shavings and chalk marks on the ground. The lesson has moved on. They march toward the rail lines. Freight cars wait wooden-sided. Sliding doors open like dark mouths. Guards with Car 98K stand at intervals, bayonets fixed. A machine gun team watches from a flatbed wagon. Daniel climbs into one of the cars with 30 others. The door slams shut. The iron latch drops. Inside, it smells of timber and old grain. No seats. Just plank floorboards and a small barred vent near the roof. As the train jolts into motion, the men sway together. A tanker from the Royal Tank Regiment leans against the wall opposite Daniel. His face is gray with fatigue. They'll reinforce the belly plates, the tanker mutters. Weld on extra steel. Daniel nods faintly. And they'll stop cresting blind. Another man shakes his head. Doesn't matter. Someone else will find the next weakness. The train rattles through northern France. Through the small vent, Daniel catches fragments of landscape fields. Church spires, smoke columns far off. War spreading like ink. Hours pass. At a siding near Lille, the train slows. Voices outside. Engines idling. Daniel shifts closer to the vent and peers through the bars. On a parallel track sits a flatbed carrying two Panzer IIs. Fresh weld seams gleam along their lower hulls. Additional plates bolted crudely beneath the front glacis. Track guards extended wider than before. German crews stand beside them, smoking, listening as an officer speaks sharply, gesturing to a chalk diagram drawn on the flatbed deck. Daniel cannot hear the words, but he sees the diagram. A tank cresting a ridge, an arrow pointing to the underside. A circle drawn around the vulnerable plate, then a thick line sketched over it. The officer kicks the chalk aside and climbs down. One of the younger German tankers glances toward the freight car where Daniel watches. Their eyes meet briefly through the vent's shadow. The tanker looks away first. The train lurches forward again, carrying the prisoners east. Inside the dark wagon, the men settle into silence. Daniel leans his head against the wooden wall and closes his eyes. He can still hear the two-pounder firing. Still see the Panzer lifting as it crests the rise. For one day, British infantry turned geometry into a weapon. Now the geometry is changing. And somewhere ahead, beyond the tracks and barbed wire, more battles are unfolding. Battles where the Flaw may already be gone. The train gathers speed. No one speaks as France disappears behind them. The train grinds east for 2 days. When the doors finally slide open, cold air cuts into the wagon like a blade. Poland. A sign near the rail spur reads in black letters, Stalag XXA. The prisoners climb down stiffly, boots striking gravel. Guard towers overlook the compound, each crowned with a machine gun and a sentry in field gray greatcoat. Beyond the wire, rows of wooden barracks sag under a pale sky. Daniel steps into the camp with a strange detachment. The battlefield feels distant now, like something that happened to another man. They are processed quickly. Names recorded, dog tags taken, a number assigned. Daniel Mercer becomes prisoner 4127. Inside the barracks, the air smells of damp straw and unwashed wool. British soldiers crowd the bunks to tiers high, rough timber frames, A small iron stove sits cold in the center. A corporal from the Royal Artillery nods at Daniel's Durham insignia. Arras? He asks quietly. Daniel nods. You stopped them, the corporal says. For a few hours, Daniel replies. The corporal studies him. That was enough. Later that afternoon, a commotion ripples across the yard. Daniel steps to the narrow window slat. Through the wire, beyond the outer fence, he sees them. German tank crews training in a snow-dusted field. Panzer II's maneuver over artificial ridges built from packed earth. Engineers stand nearby with clipboards. Each tank crests slowly, deliberately, never exposing its underside more than necessary. Additional armor plates are visible now, welded extensions along the lower hull. One tank halts halfway up a slope. The crew dismounts. A mechanic crawls beneath it, inspecting clearance and angle. An officer sketches something in a notebook. Daniel feels the weight of inevitability settle in his chest. They are refining it. He hears footsteps behind him. A guard stands near the barrack door, watching the prisoners, watching the tanks. The guard is young, younger than Daniel. His helmet sits slightly too large on his head. For a brief moment, their eyes meet. The guard glances toward the training field, then back at Daniel. Almost imperceptibly, he shrugs. War moves forward. That evening, snow begins to fall. Inside the barracks, men speak in low tones about Dunkirk rumors, about evacuation fleets, about whether Britain still stands. Daniel sits on his bunk and studies a small scrap of paper. He has torn from a Red Cross parcel wrapping. With a stub of pencil borrowed from an artilleryman, he sketches from memory. A panzer cresting a rise. He draws the underside plate. Then he draws an added layer beneath it. He stares at the difference. The flaw that cost Germany tanks at Arras is being sealed in frozen polished soil. But Daniel keeps sketching. Because if steel can change, so can men. And somewhere beyond the wire, war is still solving its equations. Winter tightens its grip around Stalag XXA. Snow crusts along the barbed wire and settles in the seams of wooden barracks. Breath hangs in the air like smoke. Daniel wakes before dawn, the cold knowing through thin blankets, and listens to the distant growl of engines beyond the perimeter. The Germans train even in winter. By January 1941, the exercises have changed. Daniel stands at the narrow window again, careful not to draw attention. Beyond the outer fence, a line of Panzer IIs moves across frozen ground. Their lower hulls are reinforced. Now additional belly plates, welded thick and rough. Track guards extend farther down the sides. Crews crest the training mounds at angles, never straight on, never blind. They have solved part of the equation. An instructor shouts as one tank pauses at a ridge. The driver reverses slightly, adjusts, then crests diagonally to reduce exposure. The tank never shows its underside fully. Daniel feels no anger watching it, only clarity. The fall was never permanent. It was a momentary intersection of steel design and battlefield circumstance. At Arras, British gunners turned that moment into destruction. Here, in snow and silence, the Germans are turning it into correction. A British artillery sergeant joins Daniel at the window. They're fixing it, the sergeant mutters. Daniel nods. Yes, you think it'll matter. Daniel watches a Panzer IV crest carefully, hull angled, engine deck partially shielded by added armor strips. It'll matter to someone, he says quietly. Weeks pass. Rumors drift through the camp like smoke. Dunkirk evacuation. Britain holding firm. The Luftwaffe failing to break the RAF. Names of battles spoken in whispers. Taranto. Matapan. War does not stop because one flaw closes. One afternoon, a column of new German vehicles rolls past the camp on the road beyond. Among them are fresh Panzer IIs, factory fitted with thicker frontal plates and reinforced lower hulls. No crude weld seams, now clean production changes. Doctrine and industry moving together. A guard beside the fence watches the column pass. He is the same young sentry from weeks before. Snow clings to his boots. Daniel steps closer to the wire, careful. The guard looks at him briefly. England still fights. The guard asks in hesitant English. Yes, Daniel answers. The guard nods once. No smile. No scorn. Just acknowledgement. The engines fade into the distance. Daniel rests his gloved hands against the cold wire and looks toward the road long after the column disappears. At Arras, for one fierce afternoon, British infantry found a weakness in German steel. They turned angles into ammunition. They forced adaptation. Now the steel is thicker, the tactics sharper, but war remains the same cruel equation. Every machine carries compromise. Every plan leaves a seam. Daniel steps back from the wire as snow begins to fall again. Somewhere beyond Poland, beyond France, beyond the frozen training grounds, new battlefields are forming.